This is going to sound like so much hate, and I swear it's not. Welcome to the Warner Brothas Podcast. I'm Kyle, joined as always by my brother Keenan. Keenan, what's up? How you doing? Let's get this out of the way right now. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. We're recording this on the 31st. You guys are going to see this on the new year, but Happy New Year to everybody. We're going to be recording this as the ball's dropping pretty much. So
I was about to say, not only the new year, or not only on December 31st, but at 11 p.m. on December 31st. So yeah, you will definitely hear us as the ball drop. Maybe we'll do something eventful at midnight. But we'll see. How you doing, Keenan?
I'm great. This has been 2024 has been one of the most memorable years, probably the most memorable year for me in totality since 2016. Honestly. Like I was kind of going through all of the years, like just sports wise, 2016, like that run of sports, I've always said best sports year of my lifetime. Because you went from, if you like in the 2016 technically Super Bowl, it was the Broncos Panthers. It was Broncos Panthers. Yeah. But if you take it from like the 2016 season, obviously if you go that like a calendar full year, obviously within that stretch you had Warriors Cavs, that game 7, you had that Steph year, which was obviously probably the greatest individual season we've seen from a regular season player ever, at least in my lifetime. Obviously Jordan 88's up there. Wilt had some years 50 and 25, but like in my lifetime, probably the greatest, if not, is LeBron's 12-13 to me. And you could argue some of these Jokic years if he continues to go crazy. You've got the Cubs winning the World Series for the first time in 108 years. You had Alabama, Clemson, Deshaun Watson, touchdown right at the end, I believe. I cannot remember the slot receiver name that he threw it to in that. But then obviously, if you go into the 2017, so within a 12-month span, you do have the Patriots versus Falcons 28-3 comeback. So like that was a stretch of time. Chris Jenkins also hit the game winner in March Madness.
UNC, Villanova, UNC.
Oh boy, I think UConn just ran through, because that was Breanna Stewart's time. I think UConn just ran through people. But yeah, so like there was just so much greatness going on in sports at that time, and there's been a lot of great stuff going on this year for sports, and obviously musically in 2016, you had Chance the Rapper, you had a lot of people drop in 2016 to 2017 as well there too. And this year would probably be the best year since that year around that time, I would say. And there's been other good years, don't get me wrong.
Very interesting.
But I think it's probably the best year since.
It's very funny you say that, Keenan, because I was thinking to myself earlier today, how crazy it is that we're going into 2025, which makes 5 years since 2020. Which does not seem real. It does not seem like it's been half a decade since the craziest year of my lifetime, excluding 9/11, 01, obviously, like 01 going into 02. That was a crazy time, but I was 9-10 years old, right? So it was crazy, yes, but I couldn't fully grasp it the way. And honestly, I still don't think it was as insane as 2020 was. Like,
no.
You look at how life was in 2020, and it honestly all seems like a fever dream, truly.
You hear, obviously we read in history class and you learn about it, like the plague and things like that. We had our version of the plague, and you would think with modern medicine that wouldn't even be remotely capable. You would think if there was going to be some outbreak, it'd be because someone did like a scientific anthrax, like bomb drop, like something insane where like, but this is just like an I mean, obviously it's kind of concocted, but like, it's just like, this was just a spread illness. And it was like, okay.
Not only that, yes, everything you just said is correct. So not only things with COVID itself, but like, think about the night. And we've mentioned this time and time again on here, but like, I don't want to say it's the genesis of the Warner Brothas Podcast, because we've been doing it before then, but it's like,
it was a revamp.
It was the reemergence of it, but we happened to be doing it the night that everything popped off for the NBA canceled the season.
We had to do
And,
2 pods because we
two
literally
pods, we
did.
did a reaction pod. I would love to go back and listen to that. Honestly, I might have to do it, but people really were acting like, and I mentioned this a couple weeks ago, how whack I think it is, how NBA fans, but especially NBA players, hate on Rudy Gobert, and it seems kind of unfair. That's also another discussion for another day, but that was. I can't say it's peak because people still fucking hate Rudy Gobert, but that was pretty close to the peak. If today's still the peak, 2020 was absolutely it because people were fucking you know what? I'll take that back. 2020 was the peak because people were blaming Rudy Gobert for COVID itself. People were saying like the NBA shut down because of Rudy Gobert.
And then it was like,
caught him to the mic, and the rest was history, right? But on top of that, bro, like the shit that had, like the people, like the celebrities after that who were acting like they were truly affected by this shit compared to like your average working man, the political stuff that came out of it, just the way people were acting from 2020 into 2021. I don't even I've never talked about this, but 2021, I don't even count as a year. 2021 to me is 2020 part 2 to me, truly. Like those years just like,
it's to think about like everybody was outside wearing masks to the point where like iPhones and face recognition would recognize you with a mask. Like that's the like insanity of what was going on. Like they obviously implemented that and you couldn't leave the house without a mask. You had certain regulations. It didn't end up becoming a thing, but everyone had to have the vaccine cards and things like, which didn't really even end up being anything. And then obviously you have, and obviously when anything happens, like in sports, we talk here and talk about how we think, oh, this should happen or this should happen. In music, maybe they should go this route or go this route. We have opinions on everything. But we don't have medical backgrounds. We have our cousin Wendy. She has a medical background. I would probably listen to her opinion on things and probably value that much more than me. Obviously, I have opinions to think like, oh, I think it's a little bit unnecessary from the data we have gotten. But also, I'm not going to be telling people, oh, the CDC they don't know what they're doing. They have no idea, or just think that this is I personally am not in this conspiracy. This is a government ploy to control population and other things. But you had, of course, in the mass tragedy spectrum. And then obviously you have, I mean, you're talking about 9/11. You still have people, a bunch of conspiracy theories of that. Some may be true, some might be false. But like everybody has it didn't happen, this happened, this blah blah blah, it was just a hit, like this wasn't even real, like it just, you have literally everything. So like COVID just it's gonna throw everything off for the next 100 years, honestly.
Let me respond to that, Keenan. I didn't expect to go this direction, but let me say this, all right? Like I just said, I was 9 when the towers were hit. Okay,
I remember the day, but I don't like. I just remember like masses because I was in preschool. I just remember I went home early.
So you actually remember parts of that day?
That was one of my earliest memories. I remember. Shout out to Joe and Anita Gagner, but it was a hysteria there. I went home a little early because Mom ended up going home, and Dad was sitting on the couch and just watching the television screen in awe and like literally baffled of what was going on. And that's
super interesting to me. For a couple of reasons. We were obviously in the same school at the time, like you just said, you in preschool. I can't remember if our mom was working at the school at the time. She would have became the administrative assistant, right? I can't remember if that was her first year or if she started the next year. I do remember she started when I was in that particular classroom.
She started that year because she started my first preschool year.
You're right, because it would have been going into 2002. So yes, that was. So I don't even remember her going home that day. We were not, I don't want to get too much into this because I'd rather respond to the beginning of this decade, but my memories of that day, they didn't tell us about anything that happened, and they were super vague about it. They didn't actually tell us, but they didn't tell us till about 1:30 that day that there was some weird stuff going around. And the teachers that broke it to us, granted this is 3rd, 4th grade, the way they broke it down to us, I remember I was thinking they were talking about in the community around the town. I didn't think it was on a national scale. They were super vague about it.
Like I had no idea what was going on personally. I just knew that it was
right?
hysteria.
Especially
I
being a
just like it
4-year-old.
was hysteria. Dad was
That's
like
crazy.
in awe, shock, and Anita Gagner was like just baffled. Like those are the things that like stuck out to me. Obviously, I had no idea what was going on and what like the impact on it was.
That's crazy to me, Keenan, because we never really talked about it. Excuse me, we've never really talked about it, about like your memories of it, because I never really assumed you had a memory of it being 4 years old.
Yeah.
But 2020, Keenan, you mentioned the conspiracies for 9/11. Some of them seem ridiculous to me.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, in this information age, the shit that went on in 2020 seems ridiculous. Like the shit we were doing, Keenan, like, okay, there's a stool, Keenan, about 6 feet from me, about 6-7 feet from me right now. I got this mic. Picture this. Picture that stool, Keenan, is LeBron James. Picture it's Dame Lillard, right? In the fucking bubble, Keenan, we'd have to swing this mic around and point it to Dame Lillard. That way, Keenan, Malika Andrews or Rachel Nichols or whoever wouldn't get COVID, right? But at the same time, Dame Lillard or LeBron James or you name an NBA superstar, they're out there playing full contact basketball. What fucking sense does that make? You know what I mean? And was all cool. We were all going with it at this time. And then again, 2021 to me seemed like 2020 part 2. Honest to God, like it's true that they say like as you get older, the years go by quicker. 2020 seemed like 3 years. So much happened in that calendar year that
it's just like now feeling like 2020, like the last couple, like is not over. Like it even trickled into 2022, and because like
slightly,
you were talking about that. Like I'll go into like the debate show aspect of it. Say like first things first, they did everything virtually for multiple years. And Steve, when Skip and Shannon were on, they originally did it like from their homes, and then when their desk went so much farther. They used to fist bump before every show. Their fist bump was like an air fist bump. And then the moderator, who I think was, I can't even think of her name right now. It was Jenny Taft. It was after that. I cannot think of her name. Jen Hale. She was not even at the studio. Like she just like forfeited going to the studio. Like it was like all shows. And then when you saw like TNT, the desk was massive because everybody was 6 feet away from each other when they were in the certain spots. Like the desk was, I mean, their desk is pretty low. But ESPN First Take was the same thing. The desk was just massive. And you're like, oh, okay. We got to make sure that everyone's 6 feet apart from it was honestly, it's a moment in time where like you would think you would read it in history, and you're going to read it obviously in every history book going forward. And when our grandchildren and grandchildren are going on, you're going to look back and you're going to be like, oh, what was this COVID thing? Like, oh my God, I can't believe it. And it's like, I lived through COVID. I know about I'm going to feel like such
I'll say
an
this,
old guy
man.
in 40, 50 years.
I don't want to seem jaded. Like I'm definitely... In general, I'd like to believe I'm a positive person. I think I project positivity, but I'm also a skeptic.
Yeah.
And some would say a hater, and we'll get to that later on this podcast. And we're talking music, culture, and sports. But I mean, 2020 is the first time probably since 2001. And there's probably been other small times, but the first like distinct time where you could really feel a shift from whatever the 2010s represented, whatever was going on in 2018, 2019, the whole world, and still to this day, from 2020 on, just seems like it's gotten much weirder. And it's funny to me now, Keenan, because I'll hear people, and I heard someone in the sports world said this the other night. I actually think it was, shouts to Ariel Helwani. He's like the number one MMA journalist, number one UFC journalist. Super good, super in the prize fighting in general, UFC and boxing. He's way up there. Shouts to Ariel. But he was talking about an interview he did in 2010 or 2011. And he's like, in the social media era now, like who knows how much this would have popped off. And I've heard a lot of people say that about 2010, 2011, early to mid 2010s, when really like, no, it's not as immediate as now. Right. Where like, if something crazy happens 5 minutes ago, we're going to know about it. Right.
Yeah.
But it at least was quick enough to where if something happened 30 minutes to an hour ago, we knew about it in 2010 and 2013 for sure. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
stuff wasn't like today it's super advanced, but it's funny when I hear people talk about 2015, 2013, 2011, because yeah, maybe it wasn't as advanced as now, but it was definitely at least the start of the social media era.
Oh,
And you could say even
absolutely.
before that.
I mean, you had Vine, you had Facebook, when that was really going.
Vine
Obviously, that
birthed
was
TikTok.
the end. I was gonna say the end of the MySpace era. Twitter was starting to really become a thing at that
Twitter's
point.
peak was the 2010s.
Yeah.
It was ruined by this political landscape. I could do a whole podcast on when Twitter got ruined and why, but I mean that's for another day.
But Twitter, I was gonna say Twitter was a big thing. Obviously, as we were talking about the social, like Facebook. Obviously, Facebook's still massive. Oh, of course, Twitter's still. I mean, X, we should say, is massive. But like
Facebook, it's Twitter.
Yeah, no, it's always gonna. I never type in Twitter. Like if I'm typing in anything, it's Twitter. And obviously, you go to the app, but like and Facebook obviously is still massive today. But at that point, it was even more so. Like you have to like connecting with people on Facebook was like the thing. And then obviously like Instagram at that point wasn't really big. It was like just a kind of up and coming thing that was new. That was all. YouTube was, as we kind of mentioned it before, how YouTube was when Raja was here. But YouTube was also at one of its peaks. That like video, that was when you could get the billion view videos like Baby or other songs or whatnot. But that was that kind of time for YouTube. But yeah,
that's crazy.
I did not expect us to
YouTube's...
talk about the new year to about 2020 and all that stuff in 2001. But hey, it means it's New Year's stuff. But go on with what you're saying.
I was just gonna say to that, like, to me, YouTube it's still as big of a deal as it was 10 to 15 years ago. It's just kind of in a different space, especially when you consider ads, especially when you consider maybe it's a younger generation. But then again, I mean, YouTube started really popping off when I was in high school, when you were probably, middle school to junior high, right? So, I mean, it's always been of the younger generation. Of course, adults are going to tap to it anyway. But to me, YouTube doesn't seem like a relic of the past quite yet. It seems like it'll always be omnipresent the way Google is. So I don't know. It's just always funny to me when I hear people refer to 10, 15 years ago as this other time in social media. Because yes, it was. But really what we're talking about here is the matter of whereas within 5 minutes, the whole world can know everything and react to it compared to maybe 20 to 30 minutes to an hour. Right. And depending on what app you were using, truly. But yeah, no, I didn't expect to do this whole review of the past few decades. But I mean, it's truly, it's extremely wild to really put it in perspective that we're, in 45 minutes here, going to be in 2025, 5 years removed from the craziest year of our lifetime. And again, I'll repeat that year. Honestly, 2020 seemed like 2 years. So much lunacy happened. So much insane shit happened in 2020.
In 2020, we were in hysteria. In 2021, it was still ramifications of this hysteria. And then 2022 is where you were starting to open up and things were starting to become semi-normal again. So really like 2.5 years. And then 2023 was like the first year where things felt regular. Obviously, we're going to still feel the effects economy-wise, and that's a whole nother conversation I don't want to get into. But, like, you're still going to feel some of the effects of it for a long period of time. But, like, it felt normal. Like, 2023, you could go outside and do regular things. Parties were cool. And it was, like, all this stuff, like, where you didn't have to think to yourself, like, oh, am I able to have this gathering? Is everyone good with COVID? Or if they caught COVID, it wasn't like a death sentence where you thought it initially, like obviously in May, it was like, okay, I can't see my gram because she might pass if she's not in the greatest of health at the time. Like she might, so I was like, might happen if this happens. And it was just crazy to think like, I can't see certain people because of this kind of stuff. It's insane.
Yeah, I mean, for me, honestly, 22 was the first year I think I felt some sort of normalcy. So the last now 3 years, which is crazy, 22 into 24, Um, but I mean, you mentioned like talking to our grandkids about COVID. I'm going to say this. This is going to sound serious, and then I promise we're going to get to some less serious stuff. The effect that COVID has already had on, like, let's say toddlers who are now first graders or something like that. You know what I mean? The effect that that's going to have in the short term, but also the long term, right? When these kids become teenagers. That's all I'm going to say. I'm just going to say, imagine the world in 2035, Keenan. Like, just imagine what the fuck that looks like.
It's going to be crazy a decade from now. And also, like, I'm not even going to get into it. I was just saying the kid.
No. Now you got it. Now you got it.
I was going to say the generation, like the youngest generation right now growing up, like when first graders are adults and getting licenses and things like that. Because of the way school systems are now, has partially because of COVID, partially because people make idiotic decisions based off of whatever you want to feel and do very heinous things that we don't need to obviously get deep into. The generations are going to be so just messed up. It's tough, and that's where social media comes into an influence of other people, and the fact that you can get all this information. You see crazy things happening like in some other parts, and you're like, well, I can do that because once you put it in your head, now I can. Oh, okay, maybe I like just in a different sense. Steph Curry. I'm gonna do it in a whole like real non-serious sense to talk about this stuff. Steph Curry, I'm shooting threes from 30 feet. It always was a possibility. Okay. But now you see someone do it to a high level. Now you're going to have other people going to mimic it. When you see bad things happen, you see it visually, think, oh, that's possible. And then other people are going to do that. And that's where good things can happen, but also terrible things can happen.
Sorry, you were vague there, and I think you were properly vague, and I'll have more questions, maybe in person to ask you, or maybe on another pod in general. We can do the state of the culture or some shit.
Yeah, I was purposefully vague because to not get into it. But yeah.
Let me ask you this, though, Keenan. I just said that would be the last serious thing I said. I guess it was a lie, but I'm going to ask you this because, you know, where you work, you do have younger coworkers. Mm-hmm. Brandon and Trinity and Raja are all of Gen Z. You just got to spend some quality time with Raja. Shouts to Raja, by the way, on our last podcast. Go check that out. Shouts to young Raj. What is your view or what is your grasp of Gen Z in general? You hanging out with Raj, you pretty close to Brandon. And again, you're coworkers, so you're a little closer to Gen Z than I. What's your view? What's your grasp?
I think that it truly depends on the person. Like, I think there's, and this is like, obviously there's generational gaps and then there's gaps within the time. I think people who are 21 to 24 are extremely different from 18 to 20. I think obviously there's always going to be people who are it's not like 100% everything. Nothing's ever going to be 100%. Sure. But from what I've seen, like you basing it off work and basing it off like, there's just differences within the manner in which you speak, how much, say, like a TikTok will affect your everyday thought. Like people treat TikTok like it's the gospel, and things like that. And it's like the way they perceive music, like me and you per se, like, and just this is a smaller thing to not get into all the big stuff too, because that could be really a breakdown. But like how Raja's fine with listening to just a beat in not really lyrics, just like little things like that where people can be lethargic and put less effort into things, but just because it's trendy or cool, people will like it. It seems like people also don't really think for themselves as much. They have other people think for them, which is where you have a TikTok. You like something, you don't like something, but they don't fully grasp having an opinion. Obviously, there's always outliers in that, so it's not every single human being. And obviously, there are still 40s and 50-year-olds who will swear, but it just may not be TikTok. It might just be Facebook where they read something.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not like it's just that, but obviously it's just a higher percentage of people within that generation that actually what they see, they treat as the gospel and they don't have as their own opinion. And so when you're not, that's talking about like life and everyday thing. Or you have it in sports, where sports media, we talk about how sports media has come oversaturated with over exaggeration and people who don't see the game in the proper way. And it's because you have debate shows where somebody will say something egregious, or because of the way they make it seem like, oh, we can talk about Joe Burrow's year having a phenomenal year, but then half of the people are like, he needs to be the MVP because of statistics. Other people are like, he's not maybe the best. He's maybe a tier 3 quarterback because he missed the playoffs this year, even though his defense is historically bad. But we didn't do the same thing to Drew Brees when his quarterbacks were the same, like his defense were the same way. And that's fair, because like not every single team is the same, but the way the discourse is in media, you get those. And I'm comparing it to lighter things so we don't have to dive into all the deep topics. But like that's kind of where you see a difference within generations. I feel like people don't think for themselves at the same level. Some do, but I think it's a higher level of people that don't.
That's very interesting, Keenan. So I've mentioned on here from time to time, I last decade I coached. Literally 10 years ago, I was in the thick of my coaching career, whether it was our AAU team, I coached you guys, it was high schoolers,
basketball camp,
and I was coaching junior high girls and boys at one point, who are now like all graduated from high school or in their college careers, which is insane to say, right? Yeah. And I remember like between coaching them, between maybe seeing their graduation speeches, junior high graduation speeches, these kids seemed so much more mature and prepared for high school maybe than our generation, or maybe even your generation. At least well-spoken. I don't want to say mature because, that's pretty wide-ranging, but at least the level of vocab and the level of how they conducted themselves, I was impressed. Yeah. Okay. And even like when I was coaching, how they could conduct themselves and how they could communicate, I was impressed with that. Right. And whether it's COVID or whether who knows what, I would say since then, I'm like, I'm not really sure about Gen Z. I'm really not sure about Gen Z as a whole.
And but I think Keenan, it's just how the change in social media happened, like how
that's part of it.
Powerful it came. I mean, obviously there's more to it and I'll let you explain, but I just think that's the power in social media and how, because people can think for themselves in a sense of like, they'll see something they like it and then that will be the gospel, which is why I think also Donald Trump presidency, I think that has a lot to do with things like that. But like, again, I could literally talk for the next 2 hours on all of this stuff, because there is so much that's a trickle down effect from but partially social media. Now it's going to be COVID, and then just like the change in psyche. And I think and I say social media too, including the internet, like just like specifically Google, which is not technically social media, but I think the fact that I could search and get a bunch of information on good things, on also bad things instantaneously, I think makes it like say like a serial killer per se could get so much more information now, and it could be, and you see it visually on screens, the way the news is broadcasted and how they're publicizing everything. Then you get it imprinted in your head that those things for some people are okay. And even though you might not agree always, not a lot of people don't agree, certain people identify with it and they'll mimic the, and it's, again, I could go on a whole tangent.
Hold that thought. Keenan, hold that thought, because I have a lot to respond to what you said over the last 5 minutes. And I really did not intend to get in this conversation, but now here we are.
I didn't either.
I wish, and let me just give you an update. We are 33 minutes away from the new year. I wish Brandon Petty and I wish Duke Bird were here to have this conversation, because those two in particular, and honestly, many of my friends, not just those two in particular, but those two are people we've recorded with more wide-ranging topics with. And I'll say this for the viewers, for the listeners, you will definitely be seeing more and hearing more of them in the future. But I would love, at least, whether it's them or other people, I'd love a third person's take on this. But to try to respond, Keenan, like, let me just go to the media first, because that's been a topic that I've commented on even since our inception, even since 2019, 2020. I was talking about the media and, you mentioned the debate shows, but at the root of it, what's worse than all that is the producers of these shows. They're the ones who are asking for this. And I would encourage everybody who's listening to this, who's a big sports fan, I would encourage you to go to Skip Bayless's Twitter feed. Go look at it since he's been released or relieved of his duties or got done. Undisputed.
Yeah.
From ever since he's got done Fox Sports 1, he has been talking about sports. Even LeBron, he's been talking about sports not much different than me and Keenan do, just watching, reacting. That's not an accident, right? He's always been, or not always, because he's had a long career since the fucking 70s and 80s, but when he really became popular with my generation and Keenan's generation, it was because he was critical of LeBron. And originally, I want you to be clear of that. I want you to be clear of what I just said. Critical of LeBron. He was critical of LeBron before people were really critical of him, because there was not much to be critical of LeBron of early on in his career, to be honest. He was fantastic. The only thing was maybe he wasn't clutch. And Skip took it literally. I don't want to use his words, and I don't really want to make this about Skip, but he would say, hey, LeBron's the one who has chosen one tatted on his back. LeBron's the one who has 23 in reference to a certain other 23, right? He's like, so I'm going to judge him as such, right? As the years went on, it got more and more and more ridiculous. And that's because the producers were asking that of him. And that's when I
boosted ratings. And then you had Insider and the Cold Pizza talking about that. And then obviously the LeBron thing happened. Then Tebow happened. And then obviously his Brady, like Tebow, LeBron, and Brady were the three things there that it boosted. And then from there, obviously you have your things you pick. But
it gradually got more insane, Keenan, because even I would say a year or two before Tebow happened, I remember First Take talking about MLB. I remember First Take talking about Phillip Rivers, right? Like just talking about Phillip Rivers, not just basing it off Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Tony Romo. You know what I mean? The more they realized how much Skip, and again, I don't want to make this about Skip Bayless or Stephen A., but the more they realized how much of a reach Skip had with his Cowboys talk, with LeBron talk, then they started gearing it towards that. Now, unfortunately, from what I see on social media, from what I see, it's Lakers on ESPN, it's Cowboys on FS1. It's literally across the board now, sports media, unless it's online, unless you're choosing what you want to listen to, whether it's podcast, whatever, broadcast television, you're mainly getting Lakers, Cowboys, and I can't even say Yankees. In the 90s, maybe it would have been Yankees, but it's Lakers, Cowboys, and Mahomes. Maybe
depends
Lamar Jackson.
on the show. I know it's literally show dependent. Like First Take is going to talk heavy LeBron, heavy Cowboy. I mean, all of them talk heavy LeBron and Cowboys. Sure. But like you'll have heavy LeBron, heavy Cowboys, and then they'll go into their certain topics. First things first, per se, heavy Chiefs. Nick Wright, he's a big Kansas City guy from Kansas City, huge Mahomes guy. So like,
but I don't even. You say that. You say that. From what I know about Nick Wright is a product of Houston.
So he grew up in Kansas City, and he lived in Kansas City for the majority of his young life, and then he moved to Houston, and Houston is where he got his start in his media career. Because he went, I know this because he went to Syracuse, graduated from Syracuse, and then he worked in Houston for a long period of time, and that's kind of where he came up. But like, he's from Kansas City, like true from Kansas City. So like that show has that, and then now there's like the Facility, which has like Emmanuel Acho, Chase Daniels, James Jones, LaShawn McCoy. That's heavy Eagles talk. We have
James Jones, the wide receiver. James Jones,
Jones, wide receiver for Green Bay, ex-wide receiver for Green Bay. It's a sports show, so basically, like they have the Facility, so they it's actually like a cool concept of a show. They're trying to have it so like they have sports and they try to get into more nuanced kind of stuff, but they have people have a wide variety of things, but they attach themselves to certain things and they only go for that. But again, you have to go by ratings and other things, and and that's where, if you listen to people on podcasts, that's where it kind of changes things. But
yeah, my encouragement to young sports fans in particular, I don't want to seem judgy, and I don't want to seem like holier than, right? I don't want to seem like that, because I was once, me and Keaton were both once your age, and Trust me, I was a fucking ESPN junkie from a kid till about really till COVID. COVID's when I stopped watching, ESPN or anything of that ilk. Like I really have not watched TV much since then, unless it's live sports. To some degree, I would say that's unfortunate. I mean, there's probably some stuff I do want to watch on TV, but I just don't watch it the way I once did. I would say this though, if you really want to learn, if you really want to get, because once upon a time, ESPN could give you stuff of value. I mean, even I can't remember the year if it was 2019, 2020, but Pablo Torre and Bomani Jones had a show on ESPN that was very much of substance, very much of it was called High Noon. It was niche, but it was like refreshing because it was not like everything else that was out there. And ESPN
Michael
just canceled
Smith,
it.
Jamel Hill, if you remember that show, I actually like that show a lot. They did at like 6 p.m. If you remember,
You talking
that
about
one.
the Sports Center when they had Numbers Never Lie?
Yeah, Numbers Never Lie.
Numbers Never Lie was dope. There was a time when ESPN was super dope, especially that like 1 o'clock to leading up to Sports Center window. They had super dope and original stuff. And I don't want to single out just ESPN, but man, just the news in general, just the media in general. I don't want to get political, but it seemed like, if you just throw Trump's name out there, good or bad, you're going to get ratings in his first presidency. Even into Biden's presidency, it seemed like, people were using Trump like fucking Lil Wayne in his prime. Like, just throw him out there. You're going to get some views. You're going to get some hits. You're going to get some listens.
Speaking of Lil Wayne, FS1 likes to throw around Lil Wayne. I mean, not as much now that Skip's not there, Skip. But like, no, they love to throw around Lil Wayne, but.
Yeah, man, it's crazy. I did not expect to get in this conversation, but honestly, like I'll say this, man, we in 2020, that year specifically, more than any other year, did we talk about more real life things rather than sports and entertainment. And I would say the feedback we got was like, hey, talk more about that. So I'll just say this now. I mean, 2025, maybe you'll get more state of the culture stuff, state of the
New Year's resolution, and not
state of America stuff. I mean, maybe especially now that we got video, maybe we'll have more people on talk. Maybe we'll make more of a point to talk about this type of stuff. That being said, Keenan, what we're going to do, we're going to table this because this has been about almost 40 minutes. We are 25 minutes exactly from the new year. We're going to make this part one, general state of the culture. I guess you could even call it a 2020 through 2024 review. I was not expecting this. Keenan and I will get to whatever it is. Maybe it's more of this. Maybe it's sports. Maybe it's music. Maybe it's who knows what it is. Maybe we're talking about video games. Who the fuck knows what we're talking about in part two? But this is going to be part one. Keenan, I very much enjoyed this conversation. The only reason I'm not going to continue this conversation, Keenan, is because we would never get. It would be like 2:30 a.m. before we actually got to our actual agenda on the show.
I actually wanted to stop the conversation prior to getting into it because these are the things that like you and I, since we're not living in the same space, we don't talk about as much. So like we have even more thoughts that we haven't spoke on. So like I would like to table this for another time, maybe get on multiple people and try to pick out certain things possibly.
I would love that.
But
I would love that.
Absolutely.
I'll repeat this. Obviously, you'll see Tim Gray here because we got more football to talk. Tim's got more to say than just football. I can tell you that, right? So by the way, shouts to Tim, League of Dysfunction champion. Shouts to Tim.
Got his first one. Shout out to Timmy.
You'll see Tim within the next day or two talking NFL. We got to do our week 18 shit. I can promise you'll see Brandon Petty. I can promise you'll see Duke Bird soon, who has a birthday coming up technically in a day and a half hour, we'll say. So not to put his business out there, but he's got a birthday coming up. I promise you'll see Brandon, Duke, and of course more Tim. And who knows who else the Warner Brothas podcast will have in store. But we are going to table this. Listen to this one. This is part one, obviously. Listen to part two, where Keenan and I will be reviewing 2024. This was damn near a freestyle. You could call it a freestyle because we did not expect this. There was no intention of a part one. There was no intention of, the culture, just the state of America and everything that surrounds it from 2020 on. You even got some 9/11 talk in there too. So, Keenan,
21st century.
Great little freestyle there. We'll be right back. Listen to part two. You know the deal. Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Warner Brothas Podcast. Follow us on there. Listen on there. Like, subscribe, all that. We will be right back. Thank you.